Welcome to Sense of Self, a podcast about the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and what happens when they stop working. I'm your host, Dr. Gowrie Aragon.
I didn't find out how to learn disability until I was 23. And the lady looked at me when I was going to 8 hours plus of testing. She said, from what I'm looking at, you shouldn't have even finished high school without any support. She was like, that's pure determination. And I was like, or fear, you know?
In today's episode, I chat with Dr. Joy Melody Woods Bennett. Joy received her Ph.D. in health communication from UT Austin and is now an adjunct professor at UT Dallas. After growing up in a family with big expectations, Joy thought achievement was the only key to success. But when she received 2 life-changing diagnoses, she had to rethink everything. Throughout our conversation, we talked about Joy's lifelong tendency to question what she was told and how she was able to deconstruct her learned expectations of Blackness, religion, and her own capability. This podcast episode contains discussions about suicide and racial trauma, which may be distressing or triggering for some listeners. If you or someone you know is struggling with thoughts of suicide or self-harm, please seek help from a mental health professional or contact a crisis helpline. It's important to note that these discussions do not constitute mental health care. Each guest has given their consent to participate, has had full control over what aspects of their journey were shared, and either currently engages in therapy or has done so in the past. Hi, we're so happy to have you here. Would you mind just sharing with us your full name and where you're from?
So I'm Joy Melody Woods Bennett, and I was born and raised in Fort Worth, Texas, and I currently reside in South Dallas, Dallas.
Your name, Joy Melody Woods Bennett. Can you share a little bit about what you know about where that came from?
So Bennett is my married name, so that's that. Woods is my my dad's name, so my mom's married name. And Melody is my mom's middle name, and my mom passed when I was born. And so my dad named me Joy because he was still able to find joy out of that situation, and gave me Melody because it was a joyous song. That's the story that I received. So
When you received that story, what did that mean to you?
it it's changed over the years, right? As I got older, it became heavier because like you start to understand emotions and you start to understand, things about yourself. And it would always be like, why are you sad? You can't be sad. Your name is Joy. And I didn't name myself, you know, as well as I would get annoyed because everyone thinks they're original when they sing a song that has to do with joy. And I'm like, I promise you, I've heard it. And Melody became heavy too because I went to the church that my mom was at, I grew up in the church that she was at when she passed. And I also sang in the choir, and so did she. And so it was this like, oh, your mom's name was Melody. She could sing. You remind me of her. It was like, I just want to exist, but I also like it too. And so I got definitely tell people when I got to grad school, I was like, no, my name's Joy Melody, not just Joy. And also helped know where people knew me from. Cause I'm like, my friends call me Joy. And if you call me Joy Melody, I'm like, oh, you met me in my doc programs.
What sticks out to me is that you mentioned that your mom passed away when you were born, and that your name is actually very much kind of circulates around her, right? Your dad's experience of you in the context of her passing with joy, your dad's desire to keep her alive in the context of your middle name, Melody. And then that has a very deep meaning. And then, as you said, going through the world, everyone else places all the other kind of definitions on what that means and what it means about you. So
Right.
all I hear there is as a person growing up, I don't want to assume, but did you feel like there were all these sort of unspoken or spoken expectations of who and what you were supposed to be?
Always expectations. I mean, it was the level of, you're going to be great. Your mom didn't die to bring you into this world for you to be mediocre. Or, my mom was smart. My mom was an engineer. So she was brilliant. And so and she was in math. I don't do math. Absolutely not. So there was all those things, as well as I wanted to make sure that I made her proud, because I'm you died. So I want to make sure you're proud of me. And a lot of times I don't think she is. I wouldn't think she is. So yeah, it was a lot of expectations, a lot of wanting to rise to the occasion, be like my siblings who are brilliant, but learning that we're not all brilliant in the same way. And that's something that I still learn. And that's something I had to really begin to unlearn in college. I was like, I don't think I'm going to do math, you know? And hope that still makes you proud, Mom. Hope that still makes the rest of my family proud. So
Yeah, that sounds hard. It's kind of like, again, you're trying to make someone proud who's not here, but you're sort of putting a lot of expectation on yourself as well but there's no clear cut answer as to what that would even be. Right?
exactly.
So it's like kind of inherently unattainable.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I never thought of that. Like inherently unattainable.
Joy, I was wondering, how did your mom's influence show up in some of these experiences that you'd had?
So the story I was told by my dad growing up was that my mom's side family, they're from Maryland, Solomon's, Maryland. So the Maryland side of Chesapeake Bay. She was the first to go to college. So she was first generation, right? And she went to Southern A&M in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, an HBCU, right? And I know that from what I was told, my Nana didn't want her to go that far. But I always thought, if my mom can pack up her life and go to all the way to Louisiana from Maryland, and ain't know nobody in Louisiana, right? Then to do what's best for her, even against the will of whoever it may be, because she knew it was the right thing to do, then I can do that in different scenarios. And I think about my mom going off to college, whether she knew in that moment later my Nana and everybody would be proud of her or not. She was proud of herself.
You've mentioned a lot of references to the Bible, to Christianity, and to church. Was that a big part of your life growing up?
Yeah, I went to a private Christian school that was attached to the church that I attended. That was something that I had to unlearn. Like, I still believe in God. I'm still a Christian, but like I've had to unlearn the walk or the things that were indoctrinated to me. I went to a church/school that was, I don't know if I can cuss, but they were racist. Okay, that's the clean way to say it. And the stuff really reared its head around Obama. And I say all that to say of like, this was a place where I was taught abortion is bad, gay people are bad. I remember getting, spankings as a kid, and it was a paddle. My father had me write my favorite scriptures on the paddle that he spanks me with. And, I was telling my now husband, and I hadn't really thought about it until I said it. And I was like, wow, the only God that I knew was one of anger. And it was really hard for me to like imagine a God or, a spiritual walk that wasn't tied to anger. And then I'm like, and y'all are using God to be racist against me? This is a lot.
Would you feel comfortable sharing like an example of something that happened?
So I remember I was in AP US history, and I will never forget this. Someone in the class drew the Confederate flag on the board. They just took the whiteboard marker and decided to draw it. The teacher is sitting there. And they asked me, when the South rises again, where will you go?
How old were you?
I was probably a freshman or sophomore in high school. And I remember being like, what do you mean, where am I going? Like, I'm sorry, y'all are racist everywhere. But that's probably the one that sticks out the most, because you can't really unsee that. And then they also, in the South, people love reenactments. And so my school, they would take people to do them as a field trip, overnight field trip. First of all, I don't camp, so we're good. But they were like, Joy, do you want to participate? I was my people were enslaved then. Well, no, some of them fought in the war for slavery. Like, and they're like, that's not what the Civil War is about. So it was like all these things around. Yes. As I got older, I definitely had to figure out what Blackness meant. I remember the first time I realized I was Black in the sense of like other or someone thought me different, but I've always known I was Black and negotiating that with like being in this space that didn't want me to be. And then I got to undergrad and I started out at HBCU and I was like, oh, there are tons of ways to be Black. Because even I had been ingrained that Blackness looks a certain way.
I was wondering where that messaging came from and specifically kind of what your family, what your dad, what your siblings, what that conversation or lack of conversation was like for you at home.
We were always, and I think this is across the board with Black and brown families, right? This work twice as hard to get half as much, like, work, work, work. And so that was ingrained in us, as well as like the better we are, no one can say it's your race. And so there was never this conversation about like, people are going to treat you this way because you're Black. It was, well, you don't need to pay attention to that. Like, that has nothing to do with it. If you're the best, you'll always be the best. I was taught, you know, unfortunately from, my parts of my family that all the negative stereotypes that you think, you know, Black people, that people, the news tries to say and all that type of stuff. But I inherently would question, because again, I was taught, my dad was like, well, you need to question. I don't think he's telling me to question him. But I would always be like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Because if you're saying Black people are like that, and the school is saying Black people like that, then how come I'm not like that? And how come your people are saying that I'm the exception? And to me, as I grew older, I would be like, no, I'm really the rule. But yeah, I was taught that Black people, you don't want to be in a group with Black people. You want to be, they're not trying. They're not all these things that I think a lot of middle class Black people, depending on what their circles are, probably have had to unlearn.
When you are being told directly by people that Blackness other than you was a certain way, and that was not a way that you needed to be or should be. But then it sounds like from your dad or from the family, it was kind of like almost like another version of colorblindness. Like, oh, that won't matter.
Yes, that's it. And that's just as dangerous. Because when you get in the world, I didn't know how to be around other Black people that were just as smart as me. I was not aware of how to do that. And so that was something I had to learn really on the fly.
You mentioned how your dad was like, just work twice as hard, just do what you got to do. Like, were you just studying?
Yeah, the messaging was instilled in me in first grade when grades equal money. Grades equal money. Grades equal money. That's how we're going to behave for school.
And did school come easily to you, or did?
That's a good question. I loved English. Clearly, I like to read. Loved English. Loved all the creativity stuff. But STEM was what we were told. And so I started out as pre-med. I don't know why. I mean, I do. But girl, what is wrong with you? Like, you can't do math. Like, I struggled with math. And so I didn't find out how to learn disability until I was 23 in my master's. And it was because I could no longer like force myself to do stuff. And the lady looked at me when I was going to 8 hours plus of testing. I had to get my stuff. I had to get my grades, my standardized exam. I had to get everything from first grade up. And I took the ACT and SAT both 7 or 8 times, both of them. And the lady looked at me, and I'm 23 years old now. She said, I don't know how you graduated college, because from what I'm looking at, you shouldn't have even finished high school without any support.
Wow.
She was like, that's pure determination. And I was like, or fear, like pick or choose. Determination, fear, I don't know. I couldn't fail. I wasn't like literally like couldn't like, but like literally was not allowed. I worked very, very hard. So like it didn't come easy to me. English did, because the creative, like, I loved it, but I was told, that doesn't make money, only for me to find out, as I'm 23, of why math was so hard for me. And I was always told I wasn't trying hard enough. You're being lazy. You're, running up behind some boy, the typical thing, only for me to find out, like, me as a child should have, like, failed, but I didn't because I I had no choice.
Sounds like you had discipline. And sure, that may have been fueled by fear, but regardless, it seems to have pushed you. And I'm wondering, what made you get tested for a learning disability?
It's so wild. So I started my first semester I went to Iowa. I was so excited. But then, like, I would spend so much time reading, and I would do all my work, and, like, I still was failing. And I had landed this GRA shit, or research assistant, and her name was Vicky Meany. I was like, maybe I have ADHD or something. This is my second semester. And she was like, my other friend works in student disability service. She's like, I think you should go talk to her. She might know some places to get tested. I get tested for ADHD. The lady looks at me and was like, you don't have ADHD, but you have something. She wrote like a 10-page report to give to the school. And it was, my learning disabilities were so bad that I was able to get a retroactive medical withdrawal for all those classes before.
Oh, wow.
And I was able to have a clean slate going forward. And, that was like a relief. I started to question if I was intelligent, but I'm like, I can write a paper at an A-level paper the night before, you told me a 20-page paper, like, yeah, no problem. So I knew I wasn't dumb, it just was, I needed extra time. And I had to struggle with, like, well, if I'm getting extra time, does that make me whatever? And I had to be like, no, I'm just getting the time, the equal time of someone who doesn't have a nonverbal learning disability, in a reading process, in a visual processing disorder, and a reading impairment. And I always loved to read, but my reading impairment came from, I taught myself to read. And a lot of time, that's not where it came from. But with my learning disability, one of the characteristics is, as a kid, you taught yourself to read. So by the time you have to do a serious reading comprehension, like at the graduate level of the dense articles, which is why I probably struggled a lot on some of the SAT stuff, it was like, oh, I can't do that. Not because I can't do it, I just need more time to do it. And it kind of like, once I, worked through that identity crisis, I was able to be like, no, y'all gonna give me the extra time. I'm not afraid of asking for it. You saw my grades drastically improve. And it gave me confidence of like, okay, I'm not dumb. I just didn't know I had this disability.
You mentioned identity crisis. What was the crisis?
I'd always been a smart person, and I thought I could do, just like everyone, you think you can do everything. And so it was this identity crisis of like, have I been stupid this whole time? Like, am I stupid? Like, all the way back to childhood, people who have learning disabilities, they were the butt of the joke. And then being a Black person in a white world, and we already struggle with imposter syndrome. Then it's like, did I sneak in? Like, am I the diversity advocate? Like, is that the only reason why I'm here? Did they mean to accept my Black ass? Like, what is, you start to go through all of these things. And so it was this identity of then, like, trying to be like, Dad, see, this is why I struggle.
Did you accept it initially when she said that?
I just was like, because it did confirm of like, I knew I was doing everything I could possibly do. I mean, I sold my season tickets, and that was the year Iowa beat Michigan in the last set. So I was mad. I had to watch that from home. So I knew, I was like, I had sacrificed. I do this. I lived such a boring first semester of grad school. And it was, I'm not gonna say gratifying, but it was like this thing where I was like, okay, now I'm a little shaky on what does this do for my foundation and who am I? But I have some answers. Now I can go fight another battle, which was going to get student, ADN stuff. So I think at every turn, it's been like, cool, thanks for the answers. Now I got to go do more work. And I don't even know if that's grit or determination. I always said, I'm here for a reason. Again, cliche, but like when you could have died too, you're like, I'm here for a reason. Um, I was like, yeah, I don't know. I just felt empowered when I got the diagnosis.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. It sounds like that, right? It's like things that were confusing to you suddenly made sense. And you're talking about kind of reason of being here. And sometimes people associate that with religion, other times they don't. But for you, I know you had a religious upbringing and you had an angry God growing up. But I'm wondering, like, has religion played a role in kind of how you perceive some of this stuff?
Well, one, I think, nothing's a coincidence. But I think it's like, okay, that did happen when I was born. So clearly, if both of us could have died and I didn't, what is my purpose? Now, doesn't mean haven't wavered. Doesn't mean I haven't had mental health struggles that I've needed. But I think that religion or spirituality played a role in it because I did grow up in it and I started to build my own relationship with, the God that I serve and seeing the different things that have happened in my life, knowing that they're not things have created on my own.
I think what you just said there, which is something that kind of struck me, was that if we both could have died, but I survived, like, what is my purpose? Again, like, there's a lot in there, right? That's a really kind of beautiful, powerful way to kind of go about life. It can also be stressful and heavy, right? At times, it's all the things, I think. But like you said, it sounds like at some point you're able to experience the setbacks, experience the emotions, but not lose that sense of like, I deserve to be here. I am meant to be here. It speaks to that foundation that you were talking about earlier. But you were saying that your mental health struggled. So I know that you've been open about kind of your mental health struggles over your young adulthood. Can you share a bit more about that? Because I know you mentioned learning disabilities, but there was other stuff going on as well. Am I right?
Mhm. During my PhD, high the pandemic, I did get diagnosed with bipolar type 2. Again, it answered so many questions. Like, because I wasn't diagnosed with depression. And I remember in the pandemic of like, I don't know, I, this is, this has to be more than just general depressive disorder. Like, this is more than that. And, I got diagnosed with that. And I had struggled with, suicidal ideations a couple of times prior to my master's. And so yeah, I'm open about it because Black people don't talk about it. We are starting to. Same thing with learning disabilities. And I remember starting to talk about it and people started DMing me and asking me questions. And it's been a struggle. And I think with being in graduate school and a thing that, unfortunately is designed to break you, I don't, I don't care what anyone says it is. It is. That's what it's designed to do. It was difficult to learn that and how to manage that while being a TA, doing my own research, taking classes, being in a pandemic, getting married, moving, like so many things are happening, right? And had I not been in tune with myself before of being like, okay, something's up, I don't know what would have happened, but it definitely answered questions of some of my behavior growing up again, right? Like bipolar 2, bipolar in general and bipolar type 2, it's genetic, right? So I'm like, well, which one of y'all? Which one of y'all family members? But yeah, I still struggle sometimes. Currently, I feel like I'm in a slight hypomanic episode, but I'm very aware of it. So like, instead of making very dumb, irrational decisions, like instead last night I was like, you know what? I feel a little whatever. So I'm just gonna go to the gym, walk on the treadmill, kind of relax, get that energy out in a productive way, kind of like rearranging what those like impulses or certain stuff will be. And I've had to learn that. But I'm relearning it again now that I'm done with school. Like everything that I learned leading up to now was to survive through school. Now I gotta figure out how to survive as like a whole adult.
What I was wondering is with the bipolar too, what were some of the things that you noticed about yourself prior to the diagnosis that made you wonder, like, huh, that doesn't seem quite right. Like something seems off here.
My depression became like low key debilitating. Like everything just felt like too much. So I start, here I am on WebMD, basically, um, something similar. But I also, in my master's, I also took a mental health class, and the textbook we used was the DSM-5, not to diagnose yourself, obviously, but like we had to do different things. I had said, I wonder if it's bipolar. Like, man, it's just giving bipolar, not fully, but like, get an email. And I was like, we are recruiting people to see if they would like to participate in a bipolar study and we'll diagnose you. Like, it was this whole, and I was like, what? There's no way that I get this email like 2 days after I started bipolar. And so I signed up for the study. They do the whole diagnostic. And they were like, well, so you don't have bipolar 1, but you have bipolar 2. You also have OCD. Like, all the stuff started to make sense, as well as like my downs, because for people who don't know, the simplest way to explain bipolar 2 is that you're not fully manic. So I remember what I'm doing, but it's like your depression is the worst. Like your downs is all the way down. And I was like, this is explaining why like I am so down, like in the worst way. And so that was helpful, figuring out my medication. I got to learn some skills. I got to learn some, different ways to like help me really get through my dissertation, because people with bipolar type 2 plus my learning disability, we would just be like, I'm gonna do this grandiose thing and there'll be no to-do list. I'll be like, why can't I accomplish my to-do list? And the psychiatrist was like, as well as the therapist was like, because your to-do list is like general broad ideas. They're not very specific. So I had to like train myself to really be like, wash the dishes, sweep. You can't be like, clean the house. Like, girl, nothing's going to get done that way.
And did you ever did that, when you were diagnosed with that it seems like that made a lot of like little things kind of make sense for you.
Mm-hmm.
Did you question yourself at all?
That questioning was because I'm creative. And I was like, did all my creative ideas come from a hypomanic state? What will I be if I'm stable? What will happen if I take this medicine? Will all my creative ideas go away? And so I was like, do I want to take this medicine? I remember writing a blog post about it, like, when I look in the mirror, who am I looking at? Like, because everything I thought I knew, I'm like, is this even me?
How did you answer that? Those questions about yourself?
Well, therapy, as well as like, I have a good set of friends around me. And my best friend was like, I mean, it answers some questions, but you really mean to think that like you personally would have never thought of X, Y, Z in the third, bipolar 2 or not? And I was like, I don't know. She was like, you would have thought of it. It might not have been as quick. You might not have figured it out in one setting. Sometimes I'd be like, I have this idea. And next thing you know, it's done. Like during the pandemic, before I got diagnosed, I apparently was in a very hypomanic state. And I wrote a novel in like 2 weeks. Now, is the novel perfect? No. Is it 80,000 words? Yes. I was like, oh, I didn't know, but I was just like super creative. And I was like, what if I can never do that again? And that's one thing that they tell you, like, you're going to feel not like yourself, but don't try and lean into those things. And so it took my friends, my husband to be like, no, you're going to be those things. You're just going to be, you're not going to do it so sporadically and not sleep for 3 days.
Yeah. So it sounds like your husband was like a source of support for you kind of in this time of questioning. Is that right?
Yeah. Because he could see different parts, he would be like, and he never would want to say stuff sometimes because he want to be like, sensitive. But sometimes now, because when I first got diagnosed and I was doing something, and he was like, did you take your medicine today? And I was like, oh my gosh, that you just snap. I was like, why did it? And then like, he was like, I wasn't trying to be like, oh my gosh. And then we had to have a conversation of like, I don't think you're being that way, but like being as though I was just recently diagnosed and now you're talking about that I take my medicine today when I say something kind of like triggering. He'd be like, are you in an episode? I was like, oh my God. But he was like, hey, how are you feeling today? And I'm like, what's going on? And he'll say, I've noticed this. So could you like, how are you feeling? What's going on? And then if that's a better way. So he's learned with me. I've learned with myself. So when he asks like, hey, and he'll say, hey, you seem a little off. Like, what's going on? sometimes I'm like, I don't know, I am off. He's like, what's going on? I'm like, I don't have the words yet. I'll figure it out. He's like, okay, like, all right.
So you created kind of like a system with him for communication, it sounds like.
And money was my problem. That was another thing. So I definitely, because some people are like, oh my God, that's so like old school. I gave my credit cards to him because it was like, I needed to be better. And it was easy for me to be like, oh, and then see the bill, like, why were you at Home Goods again? What did you buy? So it wasn't able to be like, here's this, let me get better at this. And then, hey, I'm going to go to Home Goods. You want our point? I'm just using Home Goods. I'll be like, hey, I only bought one candle versus six. It seems like very small, and people could be like, oh, that's old school. You gave your husband a credit card, asked for permission. Wasn't none of that. It was like, I said, hey, here these are. I know that right now until I figure out how to figure out these hypomanic things and don't lean into wanting to shop or don't lean into wanting to do something, detrimental or XYZ. Here are these tools that could allow me to make dumb decisions in this hypomanic state.
So you just described like your childhood as someone who was told that putting the extra effort, achieving in a certain way, being a certain way, not doing certain things was all in service of what you later understood to be keeping you protected somehow. You realized during all of that you were not actually safe. And then you find out later on that you were actually dealing with something, a disability that was preventing you from doing the thing that people said would keep you safe. Like that made it extra hard for you to do so. That made it that had made you sacrifice so much more of yourself, right? And in learning that, it was probably very freeing, as you said, and like, oh, validating. I'm like, oh my goodness, yes, like this makes sense. And I imagine also kind of like bittersweet of like oh damn, like I know a lot of people who, when they experience that later in life, they're just like, if only I had the support, right? If only I had the support or the understanding during that time. Did you ever have that period of time, Joy, where you kind of were like, oh, if only I had that?
Yeah, of course. But I remember there was this thing, it was like, if you could snap your fingers, would you automatically like erase your past and have $1 million, something like that? Or would you want to retire? It was something so weird where, just to start conversation. And I said, I wouldn't erase it. And again, I know that sounds so cliche, like I wouldn't change anything. I'd do it all over again. Like it's not Hallmark, right? But it really was like, wow, I accomplished all this stuff. I've learned these skills. I definitely wish I had support because I imagine I probably wouldn't have to unlearn as much shit that I have to learn now. Wouldn't spend as much time in therapy, but I wouldn't change it. And I had to be like, one, I can't. And so spending too much time on the woulda, coulda, shouldas, definitely maybe for the first week after each diagnosis, but and it might be because I just didn't have the time. So I guess, yay, for still being in school, not having time. I just was like, look at everything. And it goes back to being like, all right, stuff happens for a reason. I've been able to help so many people unintentionally or intentionally. People reach out to me. Random people, someone bought a book off of my Amazon wish list. They're like, hey, I know you want books all the time, but the note was, you helped me. You gave me courage to go seek therapy. I know people buy you books all the time. I just want to let you know that. And I was like, some stranger, you know what I mean? Like some stranger that just follows me on social media. And I just was like, then I've done my job. Like, so I know that someone's life is going to be saved. Someone's going to see me and be, metaphorically or literally step off the edge, and or I tell people like, you're gonna want to quit your PhD, but don't. Like you have us. I've been there, and I know that I really just always have to tell myself like someone someday, somewhere will see me and hear my story and be like, I'm not alone. And I've already had that happen in different stages since I started being very open.
When you think about like Joy Melody, if that's like, now and moving forward, like how would you describe her?
I'm not sure with this question. I'll have to block your number after this. No,
How would you describe yourself?
I would describe myself as someone who is determined to make an impact, and that impact is one person at a time. And I love people. I like to describe myself as a sponge and know that I can get better. So I would say Joy Melody is someone who is never going to stop learning, who is always going to try her best to smile, not because someone's telling me to, but because I want to, and I'm genuinely happy in a moment. This is going to be real dramatic, but full circle. Someone who would be like my mom.
Thanks so much for listening to Joy's episode. We hope you enjoyed it and that you'll join us next week for episode 3 of Sense of Self. Sense of Self is a podcast from the Mission Entertainment. This episode was produced by Andrew Coles, Elizabeth Rose, Allison Keeley, and myself, Gowrie Argom. It was edited by Ben Montoya and mixed by Asia Simpson, with music from Blue Dot Sessions.